You're now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. In this tutorial, we're going to be speaking with Kirsten from the, fluentlanguage.co.uk. And Kirsten has built up this awesome website which deals with learning a language, developing the habit of a language and speaking it fluently. And Kirsten's going to be sharing lots of helpful advice, and she knows what she's talking about. She's learnt 8 languages, and absolute brainiac, insanely intelligent. So welcome to the podcast, Kirsten.
No one's ever introduced me like that. That's possibly the best introduction I've ever had. Hello, Ben. Hello, IELTS listeners.
Evan, 8 languages, that's just insane, because I'm trying to learn a second one and I just keep bumbling it and falling over. So somebody who's learned 8, that's amazing from my point of view anyway.
It just means I've been falling over for much, much longer than you probably.
But I guess from what we were talking about last time, like your community is the polyglot community, you know? So you've probably like 8 languages. It's just like, oh yeah, I've learned 10, I've learned 5 or whatever. But for outsiders, 8 languages is just incredible. So could you tell us about yourself and why you jumped into this world of language learning?
Sure. I live my life in the English language now, but originally I come from Germany, and I grew up and didn't really have formal language lessons until I was 10. Mm-hmm. So I grew up speaking German and speaking a dialect of German, as well as then Hochdeutsch, sort of standard German. So I was kind of aware probably that people express themselves in different ways. And I remember when I was 9 years old in school, that we did, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. It's before I knew English, before I knew really what it meant. But I was just like, this is so much fun. This is so brilliant. So I think I've always had a thing for like the different sounds of other languages. And then I was very lucky in secondary school because I had compulsory English and a compulsory second language, choice of French or Latin in my school.
Wow.
So I took French. And then the school just like 2 years later they offered Italian. I was like, cool, let's go. And then there was a chance of taking Latin again at a later stage, and I was like, cool, let's go. So all the way through my life, I think when someone's offered a language, I've always gone like, cool, let's go, let's do it. So I did Italian and Latin, and then I did Spanish later on. That was after school. I trained. Then I moved to England, studied English and French, basically.
Right.
Took an MA in translation studies, and then for a while I just worked, and I had a job where I traveled a lot, but I didn't really learn languages, so I sort of went on break. And then when I came out of my job and I became self-employed, I thought, oh well, what can I do? What skills do I even have? German teaching, okay, right? Let's try that. And that's kind of when I realized how excited I am when adults learn languages, and then how excited I am when I learn languages. And I kind of really, really came back to it. And that's when I started doing, first I was doing Russian, then I started learning Welsh, and now I'm kind of playing around with Chinese, although Chinese I'm finding so much harder. It's, so I'm still struggling. And that's how the language numbers sort of added up.
Gotcha. Wow. You just kept progressing. I was wondering, because the last time we spoke, you picked up on my Spanish question tags, and I was wondering, hardly anybody picks up on that. Just for the listeners, as you probably know, I'm from England, but I spent a lot of time in Spanish, and sometimes I use Spanish structures even when I'm speaking English. And Kirsten picked up on this, and I was wondering how she picked up on it. But now I know that you have studied Spanish to a certain level, so that's why it was pretty clear, right?
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
I always found question tags really, really fascinating.
Mm.
Because in English, when you're learning English, you get taught how to do question tags because there's a very firm structure,
Mm-hmm.
isn't there? Right? You say a sentence and then you sort of just negate the verb, but you only do it with do or be, don't you? So I remember learning that and how exciting I found it, and then how I had to learn that, like, oh, how cool I found it that in Spanish, they don't do that. They just go no at the end of the sentence.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because like it's almost intuitive. But if I speak like that, the listener always understands. No, and
Mhm.
it's just
Just did it
yeah,
then.
I know. just just tested, but they always understand, and it's like intuitive, even though it's not the right structure. And I think it just goes, just speaks a lot about like the capacity of of other people to understand. If they just even if they don't put in that much effort. So yeah, I've got some questions about Welsh, which I'll ask you near the end, because
Ah.
it's from a meme that I received from a German friend, and then I sent on to a Welsh friend, and the Welsh friend, yeah, exactly, it was kind of weird. And the Welsh friend doesn't even speak Welsh, but I thought I'd send it in anyway. But I'll ask him about that. I'll ask you about that later on. What I'm really interested in is like your focus is on adults, and I guess adults usually are quite time poor, especially when it
Mm.
comes to learning a language. And I've got the same situation with a lot of my students. I get emails from them, and they're working full time or studying full time, and it's a real challenge to prepare for the exam, and then to even budget the time necessary to not only to prepare for the exam but to learn the language. What solutions could you put forward, or how would you help a student like that, especially a self-study student who's not going to an
Hmm.
academy?
Hmm. Absolutely. It's a really interesting question. I think it's very important. And straight away, we're asking a question here about not how to learn a language, like should you do the verbs first or should you do pronunciation first? It's much more fundamental. It's much more
Mm,
basic in a way than that, and much more about your life. So you have to start with who you are and what your life is like and how much time you realistically have.
mm,
This is, by the way, when you work. I mostly work with English speakers who want to learn another language. This is, I think, why so many people pick up a language in retirement, because you just have time all of a sudden, or
mm-hmm.
you feel like you have time.
Yeah.
So the key tip for somebody who isn't in retirement yet and you want to learn a language and you're busy, the key tip for me is to go little by little.
Mm-hmm.
So that means don't expect yourself to sit down once a week and study a language for 5 hours straight,
Mm,
even if that's how it fits into your schedule, even if that's how it fits into your diary.
mm,
It's not as helpful because your brain, the way forgetting works, the way our brain forgets, is that your brain is better at learning stuff when you are reminded little and often.
mm,
So allow yourself, first of all, to do something for only 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
mm.
That is important. So just kind of look at your diary and see where something can fit in. And if you can only do 10 minutes of English, if you just can listen to, like listen to a podcast or something like that for a little bit, that is better than nothing. And that
Mm-hmm.
is actually better than adding it all up and doing it in one session
Gotcha.
during the
So
week.
so
Also,
it's
it's better
like,
for developing your habit, right? So you
mm,
continue to do it.
absolutely. So it's like better to do 10 minutes every single day rather than just batch it all out on one day, one Sunday, 5 hours, for example.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense from my own experience of learning Spanish as well. We're
Yeah.
just going to go a bit off piece now. When you were talking about whether it's better to learn the verbs first or the nouns or whatever, I was curious there. What would you do you have a methodology? Like if you're teaching adults and they want to
Yeah.
improve in the language or even start learning the language, how do you start? How do you do that?
Two things that I do now. Like for me personally, something I really like to do is to, and I think is because I'm German, so I'll explain this in a minute. Something I really like to do is start with pronunciation and just get my head around how to not be perfect, but just really know the different sounds in the language and how they relate to the different letters. And this is why I say maybe it's because I'm German, because German is extremely consistent. What you see is what you say, always.
Right.
English is not like that at all. In English, what you see could be 5 different sounds, 12 different sounds, right? But coming from German, I learned that pronunciation is really helpful because it then teaches me how to spell. And then I can read. And then when I read, I can hear a word. And when I hear a word, I can imagine the word. So it all starts for me to come together in most languages. Now, I'm currently, like I said, I'm learning Chinese. And there's this whole layer of the tones I didn't find too difficult. A lot of people talk about the tones with Chinese. And it's not, to me, it didn't really break my head. But there being a whole other system where I can kind of see something, but from looking at it, I might know the meaning of something, but I don't know how it sounds. That still is throwing me a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, but I find pronunciation really helpful. And the other thing that I do now, and I think is really helpful if you're learning English, for example, is just put yourself into front of something fairly simple and just ask yourself what you can understand. Give yourself a lot of input and just try and figure it out. And just kind of go along the way. It could be a simple song. It could be, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. That's really good, actually, because there's a lot of action. So they teach you what different things mean. But it's how I teach German as well. I've got this big German online course and it's story-based. So we actually work with read the story. And then I kind of unlock lots of different aspects of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, what you were saying about the pronunciation, that definitely, it kind of almost mimics the natural way of learning a language, because you start by listening for, for the first couple of years. You're just listening and it's just input, and then you start reproducing the sounds. And then, as you said, it kind of unlocks other parts of the language. Very interesting. So another point that that I found on your site was the power of focus. Why is this needed, and how could a student get it?
By focus, when I talk about focus, it's very closely related to the idea of goal setting and all around planning out what you're going to do. Because if you are self-taught, if it's maybe your first time teaching yourself a language, or you just came out of school, or any kind of institutional setting, what you are used to is you kind of turn up at a specific time. Someone else has done all of the thinking for you, and somebody else has done all of the planning for you, and all you have to do really is kind of go, ta-da, here I am, teach me, right? So it's actually less work. So when you're teaching yourself a language, there's this whole other level that you forget about, because no one tells us that this happens. You kind of I had to learn it myself. That I can't just get the book, sit down and go, right, I'm going to do Polish now. And because what happens is when you sit down and you haven't thought beforehand about what you actually want to achieve, Polish is just like a massive swimming pool, and you're looking, or the sea, and you're looking at it and you go, right, I'm going to empty this now. And you don't really know what you're doing, and you don't really know what's going to be the most useful thing to do about it. So I talk, in order to really be able to focus, I think you need to be able to give yourself the opportunity to sit down and know that what you're doing is effective. A lot of students, a lot of people contact me, and a lot of my clients and stuff talk to me, and they want to know, is what I'm doing really effective? So I work with people on setting yourself goals or setting yourself tasks for the next, let's say, 30 days, where you really think about, okay, where am I stuck in English, or what am I doing, let's say, in English now? Okay, I'm working on removing "no" from the end of my sentence. an example out of thin air. And you think, okay, well, that's what I want to do. So I want to, for the next 30 days, my focus is just on this. I want to speak without this. So I'm going to practice lots of speaking. And then when you have one little goal like that and you really think, what do I want to do in the next weeks? It gives you the opportunity to think, well, what am I actually going to do? You know, and then you can get really specific about your actions and the different kind of small things that you will do. And when you can do that, then it becomes much, much easier to find the time as well, because you're no longer thinking, I have to learn all of English. You're just thinking, oh, I just want to practice some questions. I can take 10 minutes here.
I love that. I've been saying similar stuff in the podcast in previous episodes about breaking it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. And just the other week, a student was talking about his schedule and how he got a spreadsheet because he was working shifts. So like maybe 2 hours before work or an hour after work, he would just have it all mapped out. But the important thing, and he was doing exactly what you were saying, sort of like assigning a task to each free space in his agenda and on his spreadsheet. So when he sat down, like you said, he's not going to just be like learning the whole of the English language. He's just going to be focusing on practicing the use of articles, for example. And I think doing it this way, especially for time poor students, they're going to be able to fully maximize any free time that they do have and use it better. And also it fits in with what we were saying before about developing a habit and trying to get it done daily rather than just a 5-hour lump of time on a Sunday afternoon.
Absolutely. And you know, IELTS as a test, like most language level tests, it kind of breaks it down for you already, right? Because it splits language into reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And everything that I do in how I work, I keep recommending that to people. It's just think, you don't have to like I'm only going to do writing. Because if you're having a language lesson, of course you're practicing your listening too. But just think like, what am I going to do for my reading this month? What am I going to do for my listening? What am I going to do for my speaking? What am I going to do for my writing? So you already have it broken down. You don't even need to like come up with a magical structure because it's already there. So it's even easier.
Yeah. I mean, if the student's really struggling, they can maybe break it down for, I don't know, yes, no, not given or whatever, you know. But the framework is there. You're totally right. And the other thing, what you said before about, it's basically learning how to learn, because at school, it's just presented to you on a plate. And like you said, you just turn up. And I think this is really important because I know personally that I learn better if there's a system or some kind of methodology or some kind of program to follow. And I've got friends who will learn a language better just by reading those bilingual books, you know, with a dual path, and just by reading it and getting familiar. And I know my friend of my dad, she just loves diving into the grammar. You know, she's just a grammar queen and just loves it and devours it. So I think it's really important is to figure out like how you learn. And in your case, like you said, for you it's the pronunciation, but just learning how to learn and being aware of what works for you on a personal level. So this brings me on to the next question about routine. How could a self-study student build this? Well, on your site, you talk about an instant routine. Can you tell us more about that?
You know, I'll tell you why I had to learn this and where it kind of comes from is because I tend to resist routine, and I resisted all of this, like routine, goals, getting organized. No, I'm lazy. You know, like I am just as lazy as everybody else, basically, possibly more. So I was resisting the idea of routine for a long, long time until I realized this thing about if I don't have any kind of structure and if I don't have any kind of system, and if I just think, well, I'm an individual and I'm going to, trust my gut, then essentially I don't do anything, because discipline goes out the window. So you have to find this balance between being an individual but also being disciplined. And that's not easy. And I did some reading a few years ago. I read a lot of research around motivation in language learning, because I was really interested in that. And just generally how languages are learned. For a while, I thought about doing, I sort of half wrote a PhD application that I never sent.
Why not?
And then it...
Sorry, no. Let's not get... Sorry, carry on. And then we'll come back to this later.
I know. It's still somewhere. Okay. I think I lack confidence academically.
Okay.
We don't go there.
Right, no worries.
It's not so useful for the listeners, but we can talk about it. And anyway, so all this research that I read kind of brought me to a few conclusions and helped me come up with a way of getting organized for myself. And the other way that that helped me personally was the bullet journal method, and to start like writing down a bullet journal. So I started making myself all these different trackers and structures, and eventually I kind of put them all together. And that's what's the Language Habit Toolkit now. But for me, it was the process of organizing myself. That's where it started. And what I found was that the three most important parts of having a routine for me is not like every Monday morning, every Tuesday. Routine doesn't have to mean schedule, but it does have to mean a disciplined structure. So for me, the good structure for language learning is to plan, track what you're doing, just keep an eye on what you're doing, and review. So at the end of a month or at the end of 3 months or whatever, however fast you learn, maybe at the end of the week, sit down and do a review. And that was kind of what I worked on, and then I started sharing it with other people. And that's how my method, if you want to call it a method, was created. It's not about, you must do this, you must speak straight away. For me, it's much more about how do you get organized so that you don't stop.
Excellent point there. Excellent. I'm going to ask you about motivation in language learning, just because that seemed very interesting, what you just mentioned. But I'd just like to talk about goal setting. I think goal setting is a skill in itself, because when you get into, when I got into it, I was like, awesome, goal setting. And I put all these like crazy goals, and then at the end of the week, I'd only accomplish 5 of them, and I'd feel like a loser, a complete loser. So a friend said, okay, set 3 goals, and after that, everything else is a bonus goal, And doing it this way, it was just much more effective and much more enjoyable. But also, I think what you said was really important is not beating yourself up about it, and just accepting that, okay, these are the goals, these are the bonus goals. If I don't hit them, I'm not going to just throw the dictionary into the bin. I'm going to give myself, a little bit of leeway, at least when I'm getting started, and then small steps, and slowly those steps turn into paces, and that pace turns into a walk, and then before you know it, you're running, you're sprinting, and you're getting that momentum, which I think is another very, very important part. So motivation in language learning, what did you find when you were researching this, when you were jumping in, when you were in this?
One of the things that I found really fascinating was that motivation, 2 aspects about motivation. Number one, it's cyclical. So it kind of fuels itself. In other words, when you are feeling success, when you're feeling a good result, you become more motivated. So then you get more good results, and then you get more motivated, and then you get more good results, and you get more motivated, right?
Yes.
So motivation, it's not some kind of magical thing that you have to... When people say I don't have motivation after a period of, long hard work, that's natural. That's normal, right? It's not because you lack the willpower. It's because you haven't had a good experience for a while, which is why it's so important to set your goals small, because otherwise you don't have success. And then, you think you're being ambitious, but you're just it's a recipe for disaster, really. It just means you stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was one thing. And the other thing was that there are, in a way, two types of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic basically means the kind of things that are outside of you that you aim for. So if you want to, so if your university says you have to have IELTS 6.5, and that is your motivation, that is something to aim for, and that is one type of motivation. If you now inside of yourself accept, okay, I'm going to study for IELTS 6.5. That is my personal goal because I want to go to university and I see myself there, and I can, inside of me, I feel all the goodness of that my life will, I know what my life will be like.
Yeah.
That's called intrinsic motivation, and that's generally more powerful and much more consistent. So people find that when you are able to find motivation inside of yourself for learning languages, that's when you succeed. That's when you don't give up. And it really is true. Successful language learners, they're not magical. Like with 8 languages, 12, one language, it doesn't matter. You are successful when you don't give up. That's the main thing.
Interesting, yeah. And I usually ask why a certain student is, if I'm chatting with them online or emailing them, and most of them, it'll be the extrinsic ones. I need IELTS to get into City of London University, for example.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, it's like, I don't need IELTS for anything. I just want to test my level, And those ones who are taking it just to see how good they are at English or to see if they've improved, those would be the intrinsic ones, right? Is that right?
Intrinsically related to achieve an external goal. So the question then is like, is getting to City meaningful to you? And if like you basically feel like, I want to go to City to study finance because my mum really wants me to go to City to study finance, but really secretly I want to do physics at my local, I don't care. I don't care about City. Like if you are that, then you will have a harder time motivating yourself, right? So you have to find and I usually call it the vision goal, basically. So there's the vision goal. That's not the task-oriented one. That is really the one. The question is why is this meaningful to you? What makes it meaningful to you? And also, like, who are you going to be when you're successul? So it's very self-improving.
Yeah. No, it totally knows that it like explains this. So maybe a student who's got the goal of taking their family from Russia or from India or from wherever to live in Canada,
Yeah.
Okay. So
you have a vision. You have a big thing, and you think, or like you feel happy when you think about it. Like and that's a different kind of motivation. So it comes from the inside, even if it's something outside-y that you want in your life.
Gotcha. And it's that motivation that you're going to rely on and you're going to use to sit down and write an IELTS Task 2 essay about a subject that you really probably don't care that much about, for example. Gotcha.
Good example, yeah.
Thanks. And the other thing that I just want to remind the listeners about was the quick wins. I think, and just getting that momentum and getting in that positive feedback loop, basically, and just seeing how far you're going and how you're improving. And also, as well, I just as a side note, that I think for some reason, I think a lot of us are hard programmed to be sort of like negative, and to beat ourselves up. And I could ask, I don't know, anybody, name me 5 faults you have as a person, and they could instantly bam, 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 5 points. If I say name me 5 good quality, 5 good personality traits you have, they'd be struggling, and I think the default is to be negative against ourselves, and this definitely translates when we're learning languages. So I think we need to try and identify that when we hear it, and not only recognize the errors but recognize the good points that we're making, and this is critical, as you've said, just to keep that momentum, to keep the motivation high. Yeah. All right, so next question. The language toolkit. This seems really interesting when I was looking on your site. Can you tell us about this, please?
The language habit toolkit it's called. And it's people keep calling it the language toolkit, so maybe I should just rename it one day. So but it's for building. The idea is it came out of this sort of a lot of reading that I did around habits and motivation. Okay, so the language habit toolkit is it's two things kind of put together. So essentially it's my language learning method, and I'm teaching it to you in this course that is kind of a course, but mostly built out of worksheets. So very like the professionally designed worksheets that I designed together with a friend who's much better than me at graphic design. So I came up with all of the structures, and they're kind of pulled out of all the research that I did, and they take you through everything that I was talking about today, really, all this idea of planning really well, getting that focus, structuring what you're doing so that you can also find the time and you can work out how to do it. So for example, there's a weekly planner in there. So if you have your week right in front of you, you can then go, where does language learning fit in? There's different kinds of trackers, because something I wanted to mention is, like you said, about it's so important to be positive, and it's so important to, look at ourselves at least neutrally, which is so hard already. So tracking is a great way of doing that. And then, but it's not just like, okay, today I did this much, today I did this much. So we track in every of the templates. You track your listening, reading, speaking, and writing so that you can see which balance you naturally fall into, because I find most people focus on the thing that they find I am the worst, or the thing that they like the most. But both ways you don't get balance. So there's tracking. There's a tracking system in there. And then I guide you through a review process as well. And it's a whole sort of, so it's a course that you can take that is very, very interactive. I didn't want it to be you sit there and you have to learn. I wanted people to be able to take really quick action straight away, which is why it's very worksheet designed, and it kind of takes you through the whole language learning process. So it helps you build that routine. It helps you. It's kind of like as if you have a planner that it just kind of helps you along the way. So if you have any kind of feeling where, I find it hard to get organized, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know if what I'm doing is effective, there will be something in there for you.
So you can just sit down and get started straight away. You're just following the next instruction, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. And you do your routine. You don't do somebody else's routine.
Right.
So there's a lot of questions in there. It's not the kind of course that you take where you don't have to think, because I don't like that. So it's a good way for you to really start looking at evaluating your own language learning methods and kind of optimizing everything that you're doing so that you can become a little bit more effective and you can get better results. Or maybe you could just have more fun, which, to be honest, is the way to go to results, in my
opinion. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying it, you're going to stick with it, and you're going to keep doing it. You're going to come back, and you're going to be, writing more essays. You're going to be, just progressing much faster, because obviously you're going to be doing it more frequently. This is why I cringe when I see teachers just destroy the student, and they just say, okay, you did this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and it's like, whoa, give the guy a break. He's just starting out. He didn't say anything positive about them, and it's, but I like this idea of the questionnaire and establishing what they did well and what they enjoy. And also you said there's parts where they have to admit like what they need to improve. Is that right?
Yes. So in the review process, you kind of look at like what worked over the last year, what didn't work, how do I feel now? And you also look at, well, did I keep my study skills relatively in balance? And the thing is really, it's not critical, but it encourages you and it gives you a structure for having an honest look at yourself. And honest doesn't have to mean negative, doesn't have to mean scary. It's just the way to move forward. And then out of that, the last thing we do is, after this, you set some new goals. so that you can go straight into the system again. So you're always improving because you set some measures, then you go, and then at the end you're like, okay, what did I actually do? What worked? What didn't work? And then there's different, in the course, I give you different options for how to track, depending on if you just want to check a box or you want to be writing down what you're doing.
Very interesting. This is like TQM, no? Total Quality Management, which like, no?
I don't
Sorry,
know.
I'm doing the
I've never
question
heard.
tasks. Yeah, have a look. It's what like Toyota, I think, pioneered, or Honda, where they were just consistently and continuously improving and reviewing processes with the view to improve them, So they and like after, I don't know if they did it in the same way, but it sounds very similar. Like they just review and say, okay, well, how can this be done better? How can we improve this? And then implement it, but continuously. That was the key, just continuously. Yeah, that sounds.
Well, my husband works he's a programmer. He works in software development. So he's trained in Kanban and all those kind of methods. And I think that influenced me sometimes, because when I talk about my projects with him, I learn about that way. And I come out of project management as well. So there's definitely a little bit of that there.
Okay. Interested. Very interested.
Yeah, it's a good way of it's a good skill to bring to language learning, especially if you're self-teaching.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical if you're self-taught, or you teaching yourself, because if you don't have this structure, if you can just be diving all over the place, and language is such a vast ocean, as you were saying right at the beginning, that you need to have a structured and organized approach, otherwise you can just drown in it, literally. Okay, so Kirsten,
You've got the intrinsic motivation.
sorry, we lost you there. Could you say that again, please?
And also to set that vision, so you do have the intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. That's a very, very valuable point there.
Yeah, it's a lot to
vision.
balance.
Yeah, exactly. We've got the vision. I guess you could say, I don't know if we just use an analogy of sailing. We've got the vision, which is sort of like the destination, and how are we going to get there? We're going to use the electronic motor. We're going to use the wind sails, and then we're going to use the rudder, so to speak, to steer it. And without all of that in place, you're never going to get to where you want to get to, and without the self-correction along the route as well. Otherwise, it's just like jumping into the pool and with no orientation, with no sense of direction. It's not going to be fun. Okay, so we're near the end, and before you tell us more about fluentlanguage.co.uk, I want to ask you these questions about the Welsh language, because I was a bit cynical when my friend sent me this, but do you know the word for ladybird?
No.
Oh, that's a shame. Or hamster?
No.
Or badger?
No.
Oh, okay.
I know the word for butterfly. That's a good one.
Okay, tell me the word for butterfly.
It's pilipala.
Pilipala. Okay. And what does it mean, pilipala?
I don't know. I didn't know that it meant something in particular.
Okay, because I'm looking at this list in front of me, and ladybird is booch gotch gotta or something like that. I probably just butchered it, but it means short red cow, apparently. And then hamster means bokdu, which might
Bokdu, black pig.
Oh, fat cheeks. I've got here fat cheeks.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, like boch. Okay. Boch, not moch. That's pig is mochin.
Okay. Well, yeah. The next one, badger, mochin daer, which means earth pig.
Yes, mochin daer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is true. Because it has all these, the words in English, then the words in Welsh, and then the translation of what it like literally means. So like freezer is richgel, which is ice cell.
Yes.
And skunk is drugi, which is stink dog. Yeah, there's quite a few.
And library is Cliffordgech, where you get the gech again at the end, the Gell that you've just seen with the freezer, because that means booksell.
Ah, okay. All
Right,
right.
so there's logic. A little bit of logic.
Yeah, when I was reading it, it just reminds me of what you were saying in the first call we had, which wasn't recorded, about like opening up a whole new level, you know? And yeah, it's just reminds me the language just opens up this whole new level, a whole new universe, a whole new like special glasses into a culture, into a country. Yeah, so okay, good. I'm glad I got some closure on that, because I was thinking that can't be true. And I'll ask Kirsten, but you confirmed it, so fantastic there.
I mean, I didn't know any of the 3 vocab words that you asked me about, so bad performance.
Oh no, we got there because you spotted mocking, which was
that is big.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, ladybird is a weird.
Excellent point. Yeah.
But in German, ladybug is Marybug, and lady is like Our Lady Mary, right? It's a Catholic thing. When you say like the Church of Our Lady in German, that's often a Marienkirche, so like a St. Mary's church.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. And you can do the same with dandelion, because dandy means sort of like good and happy, and then you got lion, and it's like a happy lion, which is equally as insane as the Welsh one, which is lion's tooth, dant ilu.
Dant ilu, okay.
And then dragonfly, if you break it down as well, it is kind of weird, flying well, yeah. And then in Welsh it's gwas ie nedi, which is servant of the snake. I love that one.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this is great. Great.
I'll send it over after the call.
Thanks.
Okay, so just to finish off, can you tell us about your site and tell us, why we should go over there, what we can find when we go over to fluentlanguage.co.uk.
So fluentlanguage.co.uk is sort of my home on the internet. It's the website I run. I have had this website for 7 years, and I've been blogging for 7 years. So there's a lot of blog articles with answering any kind of questions about language learning. Once a month, I check in and I share my own language learning progress or non-progress, but usually I find something good. There's also a link to my podcast. We've got 160 episodes of anything and everything interesting from the world of learning another language. And also you can find the links to all of my language courses. And if you're a language teacher, also some stuff about becoming a language teacher. And if you want to hire me as a language coach, you can also do that through there. So it's all in one place.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kirsten, for coming on the show. You offered a ton of value and help and guidance and motivation for all the students. So
thanks for having me. It's so much fun. It's so nice talking to you.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.